Yeah. I think we should start.
Yes.
This meeting is being recorded.
Yeah. Very good morning to one and all. I am Professor Parag Raul. On behalf of Honorable President Anjunam Islam, Dr. Zahir Qazi sir, Honorable Executive Chairman Anjuman Islam Navi Mumbai, Mr. Burhan Haris sir, Director Anjuman Islam Kalsika Technical Campus, Dr. Abdul Razak Monikal sir, Dean AIKTC School of Architect Raj Mate sir. I welcome you all for this exciting event, Kolloquy 2021. Kolloquy lecture series is an opportunity for all the students community to expand their understanding of the different ways in which architect can contribute to the society. For Kolloquy 2021, we would be discussing emerging cities and various aspects associated with it. Now, I would like to invite Architect Raj Matre sir to introduce to Sulakshana Mahajan ma'am. Over to you, Raj sir.
Yeah, thank you, Bharat. Good morning, all. I am Professor Raj Matre, in charge Dean School of Architecture, Anjuman Islam Kalsika Technical Campus. It's my privilege to introduce architect Sulakshana Mahajan ma'am, the personality who doesn't require an introduction, but I will take that opportunity to introduce her. Madam has worked as urban planning consultant since 2005 at Mumbai Transportation Support Unit, MTSU, a government think tank for Mumbai Region for over 15 years and retired from active profession in 2017. At MTSU, she was responsible for framing a research agenda for urban transformation of Mumbai in coordination with the government, public organizations and private bodies. The work was related to economic development, public and private sector housing, redevelopment of slums, housing and transport policy, environment and energy issues, and the reform agenda for urban planning. Earlier, she worked at AIILSG Mumbai, included a study of 8 cities in Maharashtra, Aurangabad, Latur, Yavatmal, Ratnagiri, Jalana, Rahuri, Varora, Ashta, under the Sustainable Cities Program for UN Habitat. She also worked at Department of Town Planning, BARC, Gherzi Eastern Ltd, Epicons consultants, DAV consultants, and joint Ph.D. program at the University of Michigan in urban planning. She has a number of research number of papers and articles in the professional journals and print media on urban issues. She has a vast teaching experience from Sir J.J.'s College of Architecture, Rachna Sansar Academy of Architecture, School of Habitat Studies at TISS Mumbai. She has a number of books published in Marathi language. Some of those are Jag Badale, Arthos Susti, London Nama, Concreteची वनराई, असावी शहरे आपुले छान, स्मार्ट सिटी, आम्ही बी घडलो आणि सर्कलची वर्तुळ. She has completed Bachelor of Architecture with first class from the University of Mumbai in 1972. Her post-graduation diploma is in Industrial Design from IIT Powai, Mumbai. UTP core courses partially completed at University of Michigan in 2000. So here now she is an active socialite and works for social community like Stree Mukti Sangatana Mumbai, Panchana Trust Nasik, and CORO Mumbai. Here I welcome you, ma'am, and I request you to take the proceedings for further.
Thank you very much, Mr. Raj Matre and also Parag Raul, and I especially thank you all for inviting me to give this lecture on a very important subject, because today we are facing a lot of challenges, urban challenges of designing and redesigning cities. So in this kind of context, this subject is extremely important. And of course, all subjects related to urbanization are important, including transportation, parking, health infrastructure, education, and of course the public spaces. And the main thing is that we have to reform our urban planning system, our architectural practices, and our approach to architectural projects, and how to do that, considering all these complex issues of environment, of society, and also of economy. And recently we have seen how the health issues have emerged, especially so in the pandemic, and how this is extremely important for considering all that what we are expected to do now as well as in the future. And I have prepared a small presentation which I'll make presentation for 40-45 minutes, and then we can have question and answers. So we will have more of a dialogue than I'm suggesting what one should do and all that. Prajakta, can you start the presentation or shall I start?
I'll start now.
Yeah. Basically, I'm going to speak about the public spaces. Now, public spaces is a very vast subject actually, and as far as in our training and our architectural education, as well as our thinking, and especially in our culture, we really don't have public spaces as they are defined in multiple ways in modern cities and modern life and modern architecture. So let me start by giving a little bit of background of public spaces and how they are how they emerged in developed countries and how they are emerging in developing countries like India and other cities. So next slide, please. Next. What I'm going to, the next slide is about the outline of my presentation, what topics I will be covering. So can you go to the next slide, projector? Yeah. So look at this beautiful square. It's one of the most beautiful public spaces considered in the world, and I had a great opportunity to visit this. This is from Brussels in Belgium, and it's one of the most ideally designed public space. And when I went there, so this is a traditional way European cities developed, and public spaces like the public squares was the mainstay of their planning, right from the Greek and Athens and Roman architecture and Roman planning. And that is a big difference between the Western approach to public spaces and Indian or Eastern approach to public spaces. So we will talk about it little later. Public places in cities today. So I'm going to talk about the contemporary debates about public spaces in cities today. Next is a big challenge, and it's a big subject. What is public and what is private? There is always a confusion. What do we consider as a public and private? So that I will talk a little bit. Then, of course, the contemporary in the sense actually today's and futuristic public spaces. It's how it's different than even the public spaces which are existing in today's cities. And we will talk about it. The main issue today is that many places in many cities, public spaces have been encroached upon, not only by the poor people, but also by cars, by the variety of other uses. And hence, reclaiming public spaces has become one of the major challenges. And it is a very creatively done in some of the cities. I will give you examples. And then we will talk about, if we are talking about public spaces, we should talk about cities for people. So basically, we have to bring people at the center of our thinking, and that is what I will be speaking about. So we can go to the next slide. Let's see the traditional public spaces in Western countries. Uh, Basically, what we have in India is a lot of bazaars and grounds and common grazing grounds. But what they are, though they are owned by community, like grazing ground, it's community ground, or there are many spaces outside a village or a town where fairs are conducted, or there are weekly markets are there, but they are not in the heart of the city. Basically, they are outside the city, and that's why we don't call them public spaces in the true sense. Of course, in some places the cities have grown, and many places these bazaars and areas have been encroached upon, or they have been surrounded by users which are not really well planned, and they don't give a coherent picture. Now in this picture you can see how the old public spaces were designed. Now the left hand side at the top you can see it's a China Beijing Tiananmen Square. It's a really huge space, and you get lost into this, and it's really too big to comprehend as a public space. So it's one of the not good examples, but one of the most attended, or everyone goes to Tiananmen Square when one goes to Beijing, because so many monuments, so many, the Forbidden City entrance is there, and it's basically it has got a historic importance, and that's why Beijing Tiananmen Square is you can see is the amount of space it has occupied, and then one gets lost into this, and one doesn't know the direction how to go about it. And it's become notorious because of about 20 years ago there were huge demonstrations by students, and many students were killed. So today it's become a still restricted place, and it's not a good thing to remember about Tiananmen Square, but still it played its role in its historical development. So the second most important, the lower one is Milano, that is a church in Milan, and it's a big square. It's very important. And I visited this in '92. It was full of cars. And then when I visited in 2019, not a single car was seen in this space. And this was restored to its original glory. You can see on the left-hand side, there is a public marketplace, which is a constructed place, and there are lots of shops. And then there is a church. So the square, the public space, and the market has been combined, and people gather. What is important is this also acts as a exhibition space for variety of reasons. There are programs, there are musical programs, there are exhibitions by artists, and so on and so forth. So public squares are multi-purpose users have this in Western culture. They play important role for a public gathering. Something is wrong with the presentation. It's okay. Yeah, then of course there is a market street you can see on the right hand side on top, and the lower one is a very important and a very innovative old market street has been restored by the municipal corporation of San Diego, and they have specifically the architects have played a great role in this. And if you get any chance or you Google it, this marketplace is very interesting place in San Diego. Especially it has got a huge influence from the Spanish culture. So each square in US has been brought out brought from the European cities. So those markets are very important. Public squares are important. Then there are plazas. Plazas and squares are quite similar, but plazas are little larger than small public squares. So they are quite interchangeable terms. So one can see, and generally plazas and public squares have churches, and at earlier times there were palaces also, like in Brussels. All surrounding there are palaces, there are hotels, and now today has become a public space in the true sense because it's open throughout 24 hours a day, and people throng in these areas all the time. Of course, seashores and riverfronts were developed in the cities as public spaces. The best example is, of course, Marine Drive in Mumbai, or a public space now getting developed in many cities. They are aspiring to develop riverfronts and seashores as entertainment and public spaces so people can gather. Of course, Zuhu and all these are natural beaches, but they are not still developed in the sense of public spaces, except that informally you will see Chat Bhandar and all those people thronging around it. So basically, we have to consider that India does not have tradition of public squares. Public squares in Christian and other countries were used for gathering as well as execution of criminals by the kings, also procession. Also, they acted as sports ground. So basically, we don't have these kinds of a cultural tradition of public squares where we have chowks and we have roads. But none of them are really considered as public spaces or public squares, and that is one of the lacunas what we see in Mumbai. Every road and every street is occupied as a public space at the time of Govinda and other processions and even Dashera. And so we don't have this kind of a tradition. Now that is one of the challenges we have to ponder about in the changing society. What is the role of public spaces in Indian cities? And we have to think originally for what is suitable for our culture and how we can accommodate public spaces through our buildings and architectural design, and also through the DC rules, the development control rules, which are actually determinant to the public spaces. So that I will discuss next, but let's go to the next slide. Next. Yeah. Now these are the examples of how public spaces are used. Actually, in the real sense of public spaces, it is also important to know that public spaces were not really public all the times of the year. Sometimes the kings used to be opening these public spaces for public events like processions or victory marches and all that. So, but since 18th century, you will see that when democratization process started in European countries, especially in London, these Trafalgar squares and many squares become places where people congregated to demonstrate and demand and express their political views, their economic challenges, their social challenges. Otherwise, in England or in most of the European countries, the spaces, all the land belong to the king, land belong to the churches, and in rural areas, most of the small towns, lands belong to the jamindars. So basically, there was no public or no private ownership of land or property in cities in the real sense what we understand today. till the 18th century. So this is an emerging property of modernization and modern thought and modern political science also. So you will see that these spaces have become areas of demonstration for public to interact, to express their views on any issues. And they have become very important. These open spaces, public spaces have played a great role in democratization process, in freedom movement in India, in almost all countries, especially if you remember Mumbai's Oval Maidan, Cross Maidan, Gavalia Tank Maidan, all these open spaces became grounds for demonstration and public democratic expression. And that is one of the most important role that emerged from in the 18th century, and real public assertion of their rights and their freedoms started in this. Of course, now you can't have demonstration 24 hours a day in the whole of the year. Most of the spaces now are getting designed for recreation, for walk, for exercises, for entertainment, as meeting places. So people decide we will meet on this square and for this purpose, and for strolling, for so many purposes. So especially in Western countries and America, when the climate is not so conducive in the cold season, these areas have become important in summers, and people throng in this, and that's why they play a great role in for the cultural events as well as social events, and also the exercises and expression. So basically, why this is the difference? Why there is a difference between Indian cities or Eastern cities, or even some of the countries and cities in the Muslim world is probably, I'm not sure how, is because these towns, cities were not planned around square. Like I've shown around the Brussels square. Actually, the square was designed. On one side there is a big church, on the other side there is a big palace, and the ground in the middle was basically for king to address the people, and then also the church congregation for events and all that. So basically, these public squares were designed as not as public spaces, but they emerged as public spaces, democratic spaces. And of course, today, hotels, restaurants, shops, everything is got converted. And of course, the palaces have been many places converted into museums, they are converted into offices, and one can enjoy the whatever was private in the sense earlier, before the 18th century, has now become public in the sense you can go. I visited this Brussels Square on one of the big buildings, and a nice hotel is there, and there is the terrace and a restaurant and all that. So then musical concerts are there. So whole night it's become so lively and well lighted, well protected from all sides. So even in clement weather, they put some heating arrangement, and the people are very comfortable there. So cities planned around the town square, that is the basic principle of Western countries. And that you can see in Mumbai, how the city was planned. If you have visited Asiatic Society, and if you have seen the Horniman Circle, that is a public square actually, which is converted into Horniman Circle Garden now. And it is a typical planning strategy to have a square about 100 meters by 100 meters. On one side, there is a town hall. Town hall means it's a main, which has been converted into a public library as of now. But earlier, the town hall was the municipal corporation headquarters. And I have studied one of the American city, how it got established. I was studying a city called Cleveland, and I was so surprised that how this Cleveland came into being, who designed and who. So Cleveland was one of the British officers was told that go and find out a location where we can have a good city on the riverfront, so that we can have a harbor, we can have docks, and then we can establish a city. And then you plan a city and come back to New York. So this person, the surveyor, went to Cleveland, and he on the horse, he was moving around, and he went in on a hill, and he looked at the landscape, and he found there is a flat ground above the above the flood plain, and he selected that area for the city. So once he selected the area, he actually designed. It's very simple. First, they mark a square, which is which is to be the center of a city. The square is about 100 meter by 100 meter. Then they plan town hall. Then they plan public offices around it, and then it was surrounded by a street. And then the whole gridiron pattern was actually imposed on the land. And he designed the city for about 100,000 people. There was a harbor, access, everything. And then what should be the name? What should be the name of the city? And this person, who was the surveyor, he gave his own name to the city. So that's how the Cleveland city was established. And this pattern is repeated most of the places where Europeans went and established new cities in America. So they copied European tradition into the new areas, like in Mumbai or in Calcutta, you find Esplanade, or in Madras, Chennai, you will find the Esplanade and seashore. So many of the features of European public spaces have been transferred in 18th and 19th century to India, and we can see them, and they have become important places for us. Similarly, in Delhi today, the most important place is around the India Gate. It has become a public space which you will never find in the Mughal quarters or in the traditional Delhi or in the Chandani Chowk area or the old Delhi. So you have Connaught Place, you have all these planned areas have got open spaces and public spaces which are specifically designed for public congregation. And of course, public promenades became tradition. They were planned. So we have a sort of a merging of European traditions with Indian cities. And you can see that in our old cities, we don't have squares and all these public spaces. Now we are trying
The recording
to
has stopped.
public gardens, and everything is there. So today, entertainment places, art, culture, museum, music, all these, all the moving exhibitions are there. Once I saw landscape, a lot of green landscape companies came and displayed their plants and formations, and huge squares were decorated with flowers, especially the Brussels. If you can go and see on the net, the whole design, whole square was covered with flowers. So it becomes a public green, public entertainment, colorful areas for, and of course again, playgrounds and stadiums. Again, specifically designed as playgrounds. We never have tradition of stadiums like Greek agora or Greek stadiums, Roman entertainment and sports facilities. But today they have become part of it. So these are public spaces. And of course, the last but not the least are the transport hubs. You consider VT as a railway station, but Chhatrapati Shivaji station is actually a big public space owned by railways, but it is a basically transport hub, and people congregate and that is what all people. It's open for everyone, young and old, and caste and creed and religion are no bar, and that is the most important aspect about public space, that you don't have to ask permission to visit a public space. It may be owned by government, it may be owned by king, but it is now open like Brussels. It has been transferred.
लेक्चर चालू कर दो चालू कर दो
Whose mic is on? Sorry, ma'am, for the small pictures. Sheikh Mohammed. Everybody, please keep their mic mute. Yes, ma'am. Over to you, ma'am. Sorry for the glitches.
Because there was some disturbances from some, yeah. So urban life, basically 18th century started with a good note of public spaces. And in 20th century, between 1950 and 2000, cities were destroyed completely. These public spaces were completely neglected. Public life was completely neglected, and whatever was gained from 18th century to 20th century, it was lost, and it was lost because of the two reasons. One is the invasion of the cars, and secondly is because of the architects. Architects never considered urban spaces and public spaces as central to the life of urban life. And these two unfortunate events, you can see urban life was destroyed by architects and cars. And this is, I'm not saying Jan Gale and many urban planners and designers have repeatedly said this, that we have to consider urban life with public spaces, and these spaces are growing in number, in variety, in multiple ways. And what architects created in the late 20th century, you can see on the left hand side, it's two buildings, and then there is a small lane, and the person is lost. It's a dark space. It's a security is a problem. Women can't walk, and at night it becomes horrible. Even during the daytimes, no sunlight or light reaches this, and it becomes a terrible space. And this is cities after cities design skyscrapers, and they never considered what's happening in between two buildings. So life between two buildings become horrible. And that is what the role of architects was in 20th century, from 1950 to 2000, basically because of the huge heights, fetishness for the heights of the buildings, without considering the open spaces, without considering even the light and ventilation, which is today's practice in Mumbai, and without really considering the people and their lives, their safety, their security, even the fire safety, everything was neglected, and just buildings and after buildings. And you see downtowns. Many of the downtowns have been still face this challenge today in many of the Western countries. On the other hand, you will see the streets are full of cars, and people are being completely, people have no place to walk. The footpaths have been removed. There on the sides, there are no sidewalks, there are no trees, no shade, and people walk wherever they want. And then the traffic also doesn't move, and people are able to not walk safely. And this is a typical scenario in our city. So I'm not going to explain. You are experiencing this every day. On the other hand, look at the design architects created. The two women on the very wide footpath, you hardly see anyone, and there is no movement because everyone has moved into the cars, have gone, and you see the blank building and the poor women, they are just walking. And this is horrible in any condition, in any weather. This is simply not working. So basically, urban design, urban planning, architecture, everything started going wrong since 1950, and we called it international style, we called it modernist style, we called all the buildings were very drab and squares and glass and concrete became the norm, and the cities became really places where a lot of crime took place. Every city started experiencing crime against women, crime in the society. Besides, because of and these spaces became places for drugs, drug addicts, and antisocial elements. So basically, the whole thinking about planning started revising around 1960s, and it took a lot of time for researchers and architects and planners to see what is going wrong with the cities. And especially after they have destroyed the cities and they reconstructed, at least in Europe, when they started reconstructing after Second World War, they started rethinking about cities, what was good in their own cities and what was bad on the old cities. And in 70s itself, in 1970s in Europe, especially in Copenhagen and Denmark and other countries, they saw the car is the culprit. One is the architectural planning norms were culprits, and secondly, the car is culprit. And what they did is they started rethinking, especially Yangian kind of architects and planners. They started rethinking about cities, and they started looking at people, how they react, how they behave, why there is crime, why there are accidents, how people are become unsafe, and all this dark life between building, dark life between the cities became a big challenge. And then they started devising a new methods. So first of all, they devised urban planning norms. They started restoring the traditional urban spaces, and they banished the cars and they controlled the car population, and they started thinking alternative methods of transport and punishing the cars, so that there are multiple ways. It's now a transport issue. So if you have a time, you can ask some question, but I will not touch on the transportation planners. So basically, transportation planners and architects, in the name of rational planning, they destroyed public life, urban life. They made cities unsafe. They made cities crowded. They made cities environmentally unfriendly and very unfriendly. So basically, and you see the old cities, look at the bus, school bus. How do you have, children used to walk from their home to the school. Now the school bus, how it is entering, it's so unsafe. And look at the scale and the kind of, it's trying to push through the cities. So that is what, and in the name of transport and in the name of rationality, many places were destroyed. They're simply bulldozed. All these poor people or the middle class people, where the old traditional houses were there, they were bulldozed at many places. In 20th century, a lot of wrongs have been done, and especially in India, we're still doing most of the wrong things what were there, which have been changed in most of the countries. So unsafe roads, isolation of people, unhealthy lifestyles, unsustainable environment. So these problems were created by architects in the name of rationality and also transportation planners. Next. Next slide, please. Yeah. So urban life, overcrowded, neglected, phased out by architects. I've covered this. So basically, buildings became too tall, and in the name of light ventilation and also car, the spaces between buildings were either large or totally controlled. So basically, very polarized kind of a city, and human dimensions necessary for planning were totally lost. They created overcrowding at one place and unsafe and unsustainable large spaces at the other spaces. So what is needed is actually to think about needed lively, safe, sustainable and healthy cities. And that can be done only through the creative thinking by architects and planners about public spaces. Every inch of land has to be thought of as whether it's safe, whether it's lively, whether it's sustainable, whether it's contributing to health or it is detrimental to health. So unless we start thinking on these lines, I don't think architects are going to be very good in their profession in the future. So in the name of traffic, actually highways, 10 lanes, 20 lanes highways were created on one hand, and then empty roads you can't cross. So there were again flowers, and there were many, that's a sort of a skywalks. Now skywalk, no one climbed on the skywalk. You have 30 skywalks in the city of Mumbai. Hardly anyone walks on them. Navi Mumbai, you can see just outside the railway station, outside the 1.5 kilometer long skywalk from station to Kharghar. I walked it once in the afternoon. It just gives shade, nothing else. It's huge. It's a mess of planning. That's what I'm saying. We have to start rethinking about the public spaces. The skywalk is a public space, the road is a public space, the square is a public space, the open spaces, the grounds, the gardens, every corner, everything is public space. It has to be thought of, well thought of by the architects and planners. Next. And this is, we don't know what is public and what is private. That is the saddest part, a confusion. How do we deal with this kind of a situation? In Indian cities, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, all these cities, we are unable to really address the issue of who owns the street, whose right it is. Are the people important? Are the auto rickshaws important? Are the buses important? Are the cars important? The bazaar, the hawkers? How do we deal with this complexity? So this is owned by public. This is, in the sense, it's municipal road. How do we deal with it? Ownership doesn't make it public, or it's good, or it's green, or it's safe. Just ownership doesn't define the public space. It has been appropriated by each and every person walking on the street, by auto wallahs, the car wallahs, the bus wallahs. Everyone tries to find out. So it has become a race for individual private vehicle owner, or even a poor person walking on hawker or a handcart puller, everyone. So how do we deal with this? That is our confusion. We are stuck up with the ownership, but we are not able to control the public purposes, because everything is public. What is most important? What is the priority? What should be flexible? What should be not flexible? What is multi-purpose? Whether we should give priority to footpaths or in a place like this, or for the cars or for buses. How do we divide? How do we bifurcate? How do we allocate the space? This is available public space, but how do we apportion it among the different private stakeholders? I mean, private in the sense they are bus companies or STs, they are private companies. So they are in a sense public companies owned by public, but they are basically, they need a dedicated private space for maneuvering the buses. So public and private spaces, it doesn't get defined by the ownership or by the use or by the authorities, or by it needs to be clearly thought of. How do we bifurcate? How do we apportion the public spaces for different users? Can we stop somebody? Can we stop some hawkers from this, or how do we accommodate hawkers and walkers, because they are interrelated? How do we design bus stops and bus stands and bus shelters? That is also public import. Then why this is mess? So it's we have to think about people, how people are using, how many people are using what, and at what time they need spaces as public spaces, and are they safe? Are they green? Are they comfortable? Are they enjoyable? Are they beautiful? Nothing. Not a single criteria you can find in such a public space. So you have to start thinking about on those lines what should be the public space, how it should be apportioned, how safety should be built in, how safety of everyone should be built in, all those factors, and how to make it green and environment friendly in the kind of environment we have, the climate we have. It's poor people walking on the streets in a very hot sun or rains, or for that matter, in cold season. So we have to think about all these multi-purposes and the private uses. I'm saying this private use when I walk on the public street. It's some part of it is mine for few minutes. So it is private for me for some time, but basically owned by and it is open to everyone. So that in a sense it's a public, but it's a private also. Next, please. Next slide. Yeah. So basically, we have to think about two things: emphasis on space for public use, depending on the kind of uses public space. Now, on one side, you see the covered space, which is designed by Calatrava at the location of World Trade Center in New York. It's a hub. On underground, all the railways merge there. So many metro lines are there. On the above, there are shopping, and then there is a huge space. Maybe it's little too huge, but it's beautiful. Very well lighted in all conditions, all weathers. This is a very comfortable space created for the public. It's open to all, and you can travel from one metro to other, do shopping, go to the metro, go back. You can rest. There are so many nice sitting arrangements there in the whole place. This is one of the example of specifically designed new public spaces which in New York. On the other hand side, look at the greenery. Now, you might have heard about the High Line in New York. Again, what was it? It was a raised railway line going from south to north. It was lying vacant because no railways were, it was basically meant for industrial goods. And when industries declined in South Mumbai, South New York, and a port was completely shut down, there was no traffic for goods traffic left. And then the track, which was completely raised at one place about 100 years ago, was just lying there. And now this, one of the architects in New York, once he realized, I think he looked from one of the skyscrapers and he looked at the 5 or 6 kilometer long railway track, and he had this idea to convert it into green spaces. And that he suggested to the municipal corporation of New York, and it came into reality. So if you walk in this space today, there are some tracks, there are some walkways, and many places it's been converted into completely green areas. And I walked on this street. It's so beautiful. On both sides there are skyscrapers, but now it has been changing because old buildings are giving away to new kind of architecture, and people are enjoying this city landscape, city buildings, and you can walk through the heart of the New York City with so much of greenery. This has been one of the best examples. It is called High Line, and you can go and do the Google search. It's beautiful. So emphasis on spaces for public use. One is for greens and one is for public gatherings, both. And this is how we have to start rethinking about reusing old infrastructure, multiple places. This has been done. Even in Seoul, it has been done. You can see one of the videos in Seoul, that complete highway, which is on the pylons, and the concrete highway has been converted into green walking spaces. And it's beautiful. It's all flowers connected to each other, have been completely stopped for the cars, and people can walk and enjoy. Next slide. Next slide is again example from Seoul, the Korean city capital. Sorry, this is another example of how the space between two buildings. You can see one old building and on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. And this complete corridor has been created in Canada, in Toronto, where you can walk in the downtown in the complete shaded area, which is well ventilated or lighted or heated as the conditions are. And this has been designed as a public space. When you walk in the street, there are exhibitions, there are spaces where you can rest, and there are staircases going down, and all these buildings are accessed from the underground entrances. And basically, if you go to Toronto, this whole corridor is complete. It's about 60 kilometers of underground. It's called path. It is connected to the main Toronto station. So people coming in from suburbs into Toronto station don't get out. They just go into the underground path and they go to their respective building and they get. And this is a specifically designed DCRs were done where old and new buildings were all connected through the safe corridors and safe public space. Now this 60 kilometers of path is been going to be extended to another 100 kilometers, and the whole city will become safe. So people don't bring cars here, not many. If they bring, there are no parking spaces in any of the buildings, and there are only public parking places, very few, very expensive. So people don't bring cars, they come either by bus or by underground or public transport. So this is one example. Another example is from Rotterdam. You don't see car on the street anywhere. Just get out of the station. Parking, this entrance parking is about half a kilometer away from the main station. So if you park the car, you either go underground and go to the station, or you come out in place like this and go to city, wherever you want to go. So you really have to find out where the parking is. So it's only the entrance above the ground, and rest of the parking, whatever is there, this is underground, and it's extremely expensive because underground construction is very expensive. The money has to be recovered. So these Canada, Western countries, European countries, they are finding multiple ways to create many public spaces. Now these two buildings had open spaces about 4 meters each. Now this 8 meters or 10 meters has been merged as a corridor and it has been covered. So there is no private space left. It's been appropriated by the city municipality for the public use. Now this is reclaiming spaces for public use. And this is a public open space. Then one can have exhibitions, paintings, so many things are there. 60 kilometer long corridor, which is about 8 to 10 meters wide. Again, restaurants are also there. You can, without getting into any clement weather, you can go, shopping is there. You can meet people over there. There are meeting places. So multiple uses for this reclaimed public use, public spaces from this corridor. So there is no fighting between this. This has been negotiated by the private property owners. The buildings are all commercial and the corridors have been created by the municipality, and the money comes from the taxation, and the construction norms also come from the negotiated uses of basically mainly addressing public comforts. That is what it is. Next. Yeah, these are another example. You can see a circular flyover was constructed in 1970s in Barcelona, and it was completely pulled down in 2008. And you can see two small lanes, and there is no traffic jam. Flyovers are useless as far as traffic is concerned. We have to still learn about this lesson, but most of this big corridor, big flower constructed after 30 years, it's been completely destroyed, and this space is now becoming more of green space. Right now, you can see the diverted traffic, but later on it is going to be underground. Whatever 2-lane traffic will be underground, and the whole area will be converted into big green open space. And then you have a lot of art school exhibition grounds and surrounding them. So land use is being designed accordingly in Barcelona. On left hand side you can see a small example. It's from Pune, how the road has been widened and the more space has been reclaimed for the people to walk on. This is, I think, Jangli Maharaj Road or someplace in your own. But this is a very small example, but it's a very good example. So we have making a start, little bit of start, but that is very important, how to make start, because architects have to now start looking at and thinking about it. Next. Next slide is about again, this is, you can see the 3 pictures. On left hand side, you see the flyover. It is a 5-kilometer long flyover in the heart of a city of Seoul. Why the flyover was constructed? It in the name of transportation plan. And basically, this was earlier a neglected space between the building, and there were all shanties and dhupatpattis because there was a small stream running in between, and on the both banks there were poor people had constructed huts. So in the name of removing hutments and constructing a flyover. This flyover was constructed around in 1970s. The people were shifted out of the city. They were given houses, whatever happened to them. And this flyover worked for 30 years, but it never solved the problem. Actually, when you construct flyovers, you attract more cars, and then you never solve the problem of parking or cars and car jams and hard pains because of the traffic. So what happened in 2000, they decided to pull it down. And this flyover was pulled down within 8 days. Complete 5-kilometer long flyover was pulled down. And in its place, when they dug up, they found a very beautiful stream which was totally covered by this construction. They opened it and the stream was beautiful, and they beautified the complete stretch of 5-kilometer long. It's become a public space, beautiful public space, and Seoul is one of the best cities that year. In 2000, I think they got on New Year Eve, largest number of people visited to see this transformation. And traffic jams are not part of it. So basically, Seoul, Korea is another example. City after city, if you see in modern times, it's doing this in multiple ways. Next. Yeah, I think 1 or 2 slides. Yeah. So now, how do you solve parking problems? By constructing multi-story blocks. What I saw in other places, this is a Rotterdam. In one car space, you can have 10 cycles, and people cycle. 60% of Copenhagen, Denmark, King, Queen, everyone cycles. So they have banished the cars, almost banished the cars. And this is the future. Next. And this is how the parking problem can be solved. And you can get even good returns because the cycles are safely parked and there are 2 tires and lanes they've converted the parking space into cycles parking. Yeah, next. So basically to think about the future is the public transport plus cycling tracks, public transport plus walking, and minimum space for cars except for ambulances, cars. No one is saying that cars should be completely banished, but the cars should not be the design should not be car centric, either of buildings or cities. And look at our DCRs today, they are not for building, but they are for parking. Horrible parking provisions are demanded by municipalities in Mumbai and Maharashtra. It's a mad world today in our country as far as I'm concerned. So basically architects have to fight this kind of a madness which we can never solve, and collectively we have to do it. Individually we can't do it, but unless we have a big big lobby of architects and planners, we can't pressurize this madness of the construction of flowers and cars and car-centric. You have flowers, then you construct pedestrian crossovers. No one uses them. Waste of money, waste of energy, and your cities become ugliest cities in the world. So this is to be learned from the heart and to be understood by brain and to be practiced in future. That is what is exactly needed in the future. Next. Next. I think this is the last slide. Yeah. So we have to think cities are for walking. Cities are for cycling, cities are for not for cars, not for parking, but cities are for people, and that is main thing. If you consider people at the center of the city, you will consider public space at the center of the city, or even on a large building project. Right now, what you do in the building project is you leave marginal spaces, and then you construct the block in the middle. What is needed, it's completely different, is that create a central square and design buildings around them. That should be the new norms, and that is what is needed. But it is to be understood, and that is to be practiced, and that is possible because this is our tradition. Constructing around the chowk, all vadas, all traditional houses were doing that. Now we have to translate it in at the city level, open space and then surrounding buildings. So the next building will be clusters will be like that. That's why we were trying to do in Mumbai, in Girgaon, where there are no open spaces. When you do reconstruction of these old chawls, how do you replan? How do you make it? So you have to have multiple ways of doing it, and we had done a cluster development approach for redevelopment of chawls. A big report was with the help of Kamla Raheja architects. We had prepared the report, and this principle was very critically observed, that design buildings around open space and not design open spaces around the building. That is the main thing architects should think about. So each space between two buildings, you cannot have, you have to think about that city, either like Toronto, either you walk, make it safe, or it has to be around the open space, which is clean, which is comfortable, which is ventilated, well ventilated. So there are multiple ways you have to learn how to design buildings around the open spaces and public spaces. Yeah, I think I will stop here and we can go for question and answers.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am, for giving insights about all the detailed or all small aspects regarding public spaces, and again giving it or explaining it through a very apt examples, maybe your personal and maybe worldwide famous. So when we look at your presentations, I think merely we found there are two types of public spaces. The public spaces which are planned or which are conceived as a public space, and others which are actually organic in nature and which may be anchored by the functions around. And in India, traditionally, we find more of these kind of spaces where, as you gave examples, maybe mosque squares or the bazaars. So when we look at public spaces in today's context, many we find that we take examples, the Western examples in front of us as an example of a public space. So while designing, how do you think the architect's approach should be towards designing the public space in today's context?
Yeah, as I said, first consider, as usual, we consider the site attributes of the site, slopes, direction, north, south, everything. But first consider, of course, you can, if it's a bungalow, still, if it's a 500 square meter plot, how do you design? I mean, it is not a public space, but there has to be a small open space around which you can plan. And I have tried this. I have tried this on 300 square meter plot where you create a small chowk, may not be on all sides, 3 sides chowk, and you construct ground plus 2 story, not ground plus 1 story, like that. So if you consider, and of course, our building bylaws don't permit touching the boundaries, which I would have loved. I would have loved, because I can have light and ventilation from the middle of the chowk, and also from the roof, and also from the ground. So natural ventilation can well be designed with a chowk which is inside, and there are no external windows except on the, say, street side or other side. So that is possible. That I have tried myself in 300 square meter plot, 500 square meter plot. But our building bylaws don't permit touching buildings with each other. But in Bangalore, where I'm staying, this rule is not there. You can have just one building is getting constructed right in front of me. I'm watching it.
Plot
Just
system.
5 feet distance between boundary and building, and that place 5 feet is actually the pathway. And ground floor people are using this for drying clothes and garden and everything. So if it is 10 feet, it gets abused because you can't maintain it. But if it's 3 feet, 5 feet, and that side ventilation, there are windows, but basically you plan a building in such a way that your major functions are on the street side, and where so in Bangalore, I find the building laws are totally different. In Hyderabad, there is no FSI, and they are doing it quite well. So basically, our DC rules, our planning in Maharashtra has to be reformed in this sense to allow for creation of public spaces by combining plots, by designing from wall to wall, touching wall each other. If you see Western countries, buildings are touching each other. How do they do it? The plots are very narrow, maybe sometimes even 8 meters plot I have seen, front and back side, and then they go up ground plus 2 stories, that they have ventilation, light, everything. The thing is that they have for drainage and for bathroom and all that, they have specific requirements of how to do it. We don't allow that. We have to have all those open spaces and ventilation. So there are multiple ways it can be done. So we are actually freezing ourselves in the time frame. We are frozen in 1960s and 70s of architecture. And what we teach at colleges again based on DC rules. How much is FSI? How much is this? How much is open space? Let there be no open space around the building. Let the buildings touch each other. Can our students do it? I think they can. They can stagger the open spaces, they can create ventilation, and it's beautiful. Small places are very comfortable. Even in a hotel, they can be converted into small. So basically, two things: creating new spaces which are open and are comfortable for ventilation, and secondly, converting the old spaces into more usable spaces and not allowing the wastage, the dirt, it becomes a kachra kundi between two buildings. How to avoid it? It has to be through design. It has to be through architectural thinking.
So so as an architect, we should not look at only towards our building, but how it is creating impacts in the neighborhood level. And some space has to be offered the place.
Basically, what we are doing is we are thinking plot by plot. We should not think plot by plot. We should think about a street and the plots along them, or a neighborhood squarish, or a local area. How we have to create local area plans, then smaller plans, and then clusters of buildings. What we are doing is we are just dividing land into plots, road, that's all, and we name some plots as open space. We name some plot as garden. That's all. That doesn't help. It has to be central. It has to be the focus of the community. And then how do you design it? Because I remember the first town planning scheme plot I did was same thing. It was a narrow, long plot. So what I did in the middle, drafted a road, and then two sides just divided the plots. And now today that road, it's a narrow road. It's all crowded. There were no vehicles in 1970s when we planned. Now it's full. So it doesn't work. We didn't think a long time. I could have designed probably because there were streets on the three sides. I could have designed clusters and plots around them. Today I'm thinking backwards. I think it was a very stupid kind of a layout I prepared.
Actually, that's very interesting point, ma'am, that you mentioned. You know, in good old days, the architecture age was a public age. You know, from that age onwards, the publicness was felt. And nowadays we see the building coming back, stepping back little behind, and the edge is now covered by a compound wall. It has been taken by a compound wall, which is defining the public and private ownership of the plot, and of course creating a lot of social issues that we see in nowadays time.
Yes. What is called as in Cities for People book, there is a nice concept, soft edge and hard edge. You have to create soft edges, not hard edges, like a big compound wall and going to shut down everything. And if you design plot by plot, even then space between two buildings, you construct a wall. So naturally it's 4 feet, 5 feet, 10 feet, whatever is the open space. That instead, if you have combined the open spaces, you can have at least some greenery better. But two buildings, owners are different and they don't come together to discuss and what is to be done with the space. That is basically, we are very exclusionary approach to our living I think it's the part of the culture, it's part of the social divisions. We have caste systems, we don't think about, that's why I said traditional, whatever we had, even our temples in South, Ayyars have different temples and Iyengas have different temples and they don't match the open spaces around the temple. It's only private, it's only for that caste or that.
Total ये रहेगा
It's not like pardon, I can. Yeah, even mosque, you see that there is a compound wall and there is a big ground, but it's a religious community space. It's not a public space. So we have to differentiate between private, what is community, what is public, what is non-public, and not ownership, but how you use it. How you use it, how flexible you are, how you are utilizing the spaces, that is very important.
We can take a few questions from the students' side.
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
Can I have a little break? I will just have a hot water.
Yes.
Just a minute. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Meanwhile, students can put their question on the chat box.
This is really unacceptable that somebody is unmuting himself or herself. Absolutely a very crude thing to do in such a beautiful lecture. Prajakta, remove the ones who are unmuting themselves. No need them to be here in the lecture.
If you could make others co-host, then we could do it. If not possible.
Yeah, something. But actually remove the ones who are unmuting.
I'll make you host.
No, don't make me host. No, don't do that. My internet connection is really bad.
Parag has also disconnected in between.
Terence is there?
Thank you.
Yeah, I do.
So any questions?
Sorry for that. Yeah. Questions.
I think the forum is open for the students to ask the question. If students can ask, or else put their question on chat box.
Okay, I will see the chat box. I can't see any questions in chat box.
Students can also unmute themselves to put up a question if they want.
Yeah.
Uzair has asked the question. In a dense city like Mumbai, where relocation of the people is quite hard and absence of public spaces is large, how do we, as a designer, improvise from here on?
Yeah, basically, as an architect, you can't do it. But as an urban planner, it is the domain of thinking about the whole large city and its approaches. It's not the domain of architecture. That is first thing you must understand, that though this has been, most of our DC rules are designed by technocrats. And some of them are architects, but they are not urban planners. They don't think in a larger terms. As I said, our development plans and our development rules are not really conducive for thinking like this. Now, suppose I am the planner. What will I do? The first of all I will do is that this is the misconception that there are no public spaces can be created. As I said, we did a study of the C ward, which is the densest ward in Mumbai. And there are average age of the building is about 100 years. They are all chawls and they are all mixed use. Now, how do we systematically go about creating public spaces as well as redeveloping the area? And you can't do it by just bulldozing it's about 2 square kilometers area. So you can't do it in one go. You have to have a strategy, what is to be done. And probably that report, I'm not able to share it right now. What it has been done is that if you look at the C ward, we have taken up an area called Nal Bazar. In Nal Bazar, there are roads around it where the buses travel. It's about 100, I think, 100 acres, or I don't exact. Anyway, the bus routes there are bus streets which are wider streets. So within that area right now, we plan to do no cars, no vehicles inside that. That is the first thing, first principle, because it's so dense. And right now, if you go in Nal Bazar, in one of the streets, there is a 20-story building coming up. Now imagine a 20 feet wide road and the whole building materials are coming and all that. Same thing is happening in B ward also, near Sanders Road and other places. So basically you can't do, some plots are 60 square meter owned by one single person. Abdul Rahman Street, all those plots are between 60 and 600 square meters. They are very small and presently they are all built up, touching each other. So we can still have that specific rules for that area where buildings can touch and then still merge, and they can create small open spaces around which new buildings can be, because these are all ground plus 2 or 3 story structure, not very tall. So you can have shops on the ground floor, you can have storerooms behind and housing above. Now the thing is that why this is not done? It's architecturally it's possible. Planning wise possible. We can redesign the streetscapes. We can have urban designers to design we can have shop lines. We can have multi-purpose uses. See, the FSI used in this area is about 2. Roughly 2. So if you want to accommodate same number of people, you can accommodate them, but they will have their houses. If they're small, they will be double. But if there are big houses, you have to retain them. So you can't say that everyone will get double the FSI. Somebody is having 700 square feet house will not get the double area. Somebody is having only 100 square meter, 50 square meter, or even 10 square meter rooms are there. People are staying in that. So we have to think each area in a different way, and don't think we don't have to increase. What happens if you redevelop in this fashion? What happens? The owners who have no business over there. Suppose somebody has a shop there and he wants to stay upstairs. He will stay. He or she will stay there. But suppose there is somebody whose business is closed and they are working somewhere. What they will do is that they will sell and they will go somewhere. Automatically, the recycling takes place. Now, what has happened in Mumbai? This resale has completely stopped because of the rent control. You can only change the use from a stationery shop to computer shop. But you can't change the building from residential to commercial or commercial to residential. Now, at one point of time, Nariman Point is completely commercial. It's completely office building. 40% of offices are not vacant now. No one stays there. We have suggested to the government that take for example, Air India building. 80% is vacant. Indian Express Tower has been sold by Indian Express to somebody. No, you don't see light, you don't see. What do we do with such infrastructure? So we were thinking of converting this commercial areas into residential, small tenements. And essential staff who are staying away because these areas are not commercially viable. People can come and stay there, either rental housing or people who are, they can be converted into small 3 months old, or even Sachivalaya people can stay there. Right now they travel from Virar and Dahad. If you convert some of the buildings into rental housing of commercial building, that it can be done. I tried this. It's not difficult. So you have to think of recycling, redevelopment, recreating with aim of not allowing this wastage of. Second, another exercise is that again, you know how many housing units are vacant? At least 10 lakhs. You don't need to construct jhoppadpattis. Everything should be, you should make it that every single empty house will attract, will be taken away by either society and rented out or converted or whatever. Now, so much construction has happened. It is lying vacant, either commercial. Now, again, think about this today's situation. Many people have started working from home. Now they don't. Many companies in America, like Google and all, they're considering that they can. Many staff will permanently work from home. Now they are thinking of how to convert their office spaces. They don't need it. Many those who have rented it, they have returned it. Now there are no rentals for offices. How do we recycle them? How do we convert them? It is not difficult to think alternate uses. I know one in Berlin, the architect told me it's 12-story parking lot. It has been converted into housing for airport authorities staff, airport the GVK staff, as dormitories, because single men, lot of them securities and helpers and all those are accommodated in that building. It has been converted into, now parking can be, imagine just height is 2.4 meters or less. It's been converted into housing without legal permission. Think differently. That's what I'm saying. It's not that complete failure is about thinking. How so basically, so can we still do some kind of modification to make it usable in future, like placing markets in the pathway? Many streets can be made car free. It has been done worldwide. Increase public transport, increase anyway Mumbai is like city is mostly public transport oriented, but best is doing bad job of it. Once the cars are invaded, the streets are crowded and best buses are losing. So we have to think about this. Again, a lot of surveys and studies have to be done. So I'm not able to tell you what needs to be done. You have to think creatively that yes, alternative is possible, and how to do it is our job. That is what architects should start doing. And don't look at the DC rules. They are the stupidest DC rules made by stupidest people in the world. You create your own legal rules and think about it, why you should do it, how you should do it. That is what creativity is about. So I think anything can be like Crawford Market. Crawford Market has got a big, and all the upper stories are vacant now. Because the godowns, you can't accommodate much godowns there. Mostly godowns have gone. I know the shops are just outlets for trading of wholesale cloth. Not much retail happening. Now, how to convert the whole Crawford market, the Mangaldas market into something else. So unless you study a particular problem, unless you study particular area, unless you study real issues with the people, and you have a vision for a better city, I think that is possible to do. I just gave you example. Why not think of Air India building partially converted into staff quarters? Just people who get transferred to Sachivalaya and all. People have started working from home. So they will definitely, people would like, many techies would come up and buy flats in or rent out in Air India building, very nice environment. And their houses in Dombivli and Kalyan could be vacated. And then they could be used by the other people. Slum dwellers, they need holding hand from our people like us. But our authorities are not with us and we are not with authorities. That is the problem. And we are not with the people. We are thinking about authorities as the main drivers of the city. That is not the case. We have to create it. Yeah. Which city as an urban planner is the perfect case study in your opinion and vice versa? I mean, this is a utopian idea that any city has the ideal because times change, society change, the production change, the services change from every city. Now, Mumbai was an ideal city, the best city in India in 1950s. Look what we have done with it. Nothing remains ideal. There is no fixed ideal. Ideals are the best thing is that keep on changing and thinking. As increase, you can't think of that. Yeah.
Ma'am, can we at this time where we are living in, can we say that the ideal cities could be formed with the community involvement? It's not the exact way of.
Yeah, see, what is happening is that community is also shifting. Like some people will agree today and then they leave. So what is community? So to certain extent, the existing users, architects and the authority, they have to sit together to come to a conclusion. What happened in Seoul, what happened because every issue is very complex, every issue is very contentious. If you go to a single cooperative society, if there are 100 flats, there are 100 voices and 100 demands. How do we address them? You can't. So we need methods of addressing the personal and the public and the community. So saying one thing, public participation should be there, but then how to do it? It has become a science now. How to conduct public participation with a systematic, a structured way of doing it. Otherwise, it becomes a chaos. And in Seoul, what they did, when they faced such a problem, it is very funny how people do it. The planner told me that they were fighting so much over politics, society, this stakeholder, that stakeholder. One day they called everyone in a big hall, in a big conference room in a hotel. And when they started discussing, they simply closed the doors of the hall, of the hotel, and they said, in 3 days, these are 5 alternatives. You have to come to one of them or combination of 2, and you will not be allowed to get out. In 3 days, you have to take a decision, and that has to be with consensus. Do whatever you want. You break your heads, you kill each other, and that solved the problem. That did, because you need to, if you have stakes, you have to find a solution. You are not only part of solution, you're there. Everyone is part of problem and everyone can become part of solution. So we have to find methods, and our society is so no one trusts anyone. That is our problem because of the traditional caste system. wife will say one thing, the husband will say one thing, the children will demand something. How do they? It's very difficult in a complex situation, but we have to find out some way, and that is what architects are also to be taught. I'm not the best person to explain this.
That's
Uh,
interesting point, ma'am. Actually, we are part of the community, and when you guys are going to pass out, and you are going to represent your own city or wherever you will be working, so it's a major role that everyone have to play, and
yeah.
that's a very interesting point, ma'am.
Yeah. There is one interesting question about the Kharghar Skyway. What can be done about it? Actually, I don't remember, one of the students from the new Mumbai colleges had come to me and what could be done. So she had mapped the whole thing, the complete corridor. So, and it's quite wide, 10 feet. The problem, the security, people don't walk. So how to attract people on that skywalk? That is a challenge. So she shared very interesting. She created wherever possible larger connections with the skywalk. So if the skywalk was 10 feet wide, wherever possible, she extended the skywalk and made it into a small exhibition room or green space or terrace where people could sit and all that. So she created variety of uses along this 1.5 square kilometer corridor where people will be attracted. At one place, she created a small, I think 2 or 3 small areas for only hawkers and flea market. So every day they will come. They will have to pay an nominal charges to hawk their wares, unlimited. Then there were some art exhibition. Then there were some municipal exhibitions to be there. All these kinds of things, security. She converted it into a multi-purpose use. So that is not impossible because so much is done and it's wasted. So how to recycle it? As I said, some portion, like the whole railway line, high line is converted into green space. One can remove the roofs and convert it into green. That is also possible. And create shades wherever people can sit in between and walk. So there is another very interesting example we saw in Barcelona. It's a big. You see the VT station. There are 2 main lines and local lines, and then so many tracks go along. Similar terminus was there in Barcelona. What they did is that from the terminus, because of the railway line, the 2 areas were completely divided on one side or the other side, and no one could cross. There were no underpasses, or then they were thinking of constructing flowers connecting the 2 areas. And so what they did actually in reality is 1.5 kilometer long and about 60, 70 meters wide, complete covered area at 6-meter height, 7-meter height. They created a big plaza. On that plaza, they connected with staircases and escalators and lifts. And what happened is that 2 sides were well connected with this big open space. And then they created garden. Then they created some shades where solar panels were there, and the whole area was lighted because with the solar panels at night. The 60-meter wide and 1.5 kilometer long corridor on 7-meter, about 8 meters, and on the sides of the railway tracks, they made nice jalis and they covered with greenery. And they created underpasses below the railway track to connect the 2 sides. So it's a very nice project they created. Now, this is a public project. It's very nicely done. And ultimately, the tracks only carry the main railway lines and local line. the space above it could be created. At one point of time, one of the architects in Mumbai came to us and he said he wants to have 30-kilometer long tracks covered from Churchgate to Andheri or Borivali. Now, that is partly possible. One could cycle 20 kilometers from Borivali to Churchgate. That was his idea. Our DC rules, our mindset, our government, they don't permit all these kinds of things. But somehow we have to be creative and we have to make sense to the decision makers that this is possible to do. Which city? Do you think the global pandemic situation will give a boost to build public spaces? What do you mean by build public spaces?
India. Why do we see public open spaces in India more compounded, unlike other countries? Let's say gardens.
Because we don't trust each other. We think everyone will encroach and then my space will be lost. We don't trust each other. Basically, think of that. One community doesn't trust the other community. If somebody marries somebody, even Pataudi marries Sharmila Tagore, it's love jihad. It's such a stupid thing to call. I mean, there is, what is this nonsense going on? Why can't we develop trust unless we intermix, intermarry, interchange, exchange? How do we have the trust built in us? At least in colleges, we trust our teachers, our students, but once we go out, what is the situation outside in social life, in community life? As I said, if I pray to Shiva, then I can't pray to Vishnu. That Ayanga and Ayanga, they have different temples. No one can enter this, no one can enter that. The Dalits can't enter. They have to fight for. So where is the public space? There is no public space except the streets and bazaars. Everything is community, communal, or personal, or private. We have to. I mean, we don't allow everyone to get into our house. That is a different story. But in you can't have in a building, somebody eats non-veg, that family is not wanted. Somebody wants to sell a house, no, you can't sell it to the other caste people. You have to have same caste. All this is because of the social norms, culture, society. We are not modernizing. We don't want to modernize. Today, it's anti-modernist, modern attitudes are prevailing all over in the political. So it's sad, but it's not good for architects to think like that.
Yeah, ma'am, I think we should take a last question. How do we now look at after pandemic and post-pandemic condition now? How do we look at public spaces now? I think that the question is from the Namira.
Yeah, because thing is that as we have seen, anything made into public, people start crowding it. How do you control? You have to have limits on how many people can congregate at one place for what. See, when you enter a theater, the theater has got capacity. Once that capacity is over, you have to buy ticket, only 500 tickets are sold, finished. Next show. No pilgrimage. Why can't we control it? Every year one has to go to one particular temple. It's not necessary. You go in 10 years or once in a lifetime. Everyone goes to Kumbh Mela after 12. And really, you spread, what do we gain? If you have attended one Kumbh Mela, I think in the lifetime, one should be given a license to go to any place like this. It should be controlled. It is a duty. I remember in Barcelona, there is a garden. It's called, it's a beautiful garden created by architect what's his name? Anyone can tell me? I'm bad at remembering names. Who is constructing, who has designed the big cathedral there? It's still 100 years, it's under construction. Okay. Anyway, it's a garden. The garden was open to the public. And that garden is so beautiful and so unique that one day they had 2 million, 1 year, 2 million visitors. 2 million visitors to a garden in 1 year, and then they did the measurement and they realized the flora, fauna, the pathways, everything was getting destroyed. Next year they stopped it. There is a cap. You can't have more than how many? 3,000 people per day. So 9,000, 90,000. And you have to buy ticket. They put gates. One day we didn't know that garden. We climbed up to the garden. It's on the hill. We actually climbed up and said we want to buy tickets. Tickets are over for today. No, come tomorrow or book online. If you have ticket, you will enter. Otherwise, no. So we went, bought online tickets next day, and they give a slot. You have to enter between 10:30, not any time of the day. Everyone is given slot. Similar thing is there in the temple also, the church also. So all these public spaces have to be controlled for specific events and specific reasons. Now, environmental reason is a prime reason, social safety is a prime reason, pandemic is a spell. Any temple, any yatra, now when they stop Pandharpur yatra, isn't it right? I think it's right. And every year some people go on that Pandharpur yatra. Why every year? New people, if they want, they should be allowed to go. If they should cap it about 1 lakh people at Pandharpur at a time, not more than that. And they create so much social problem, environment problem. The river gets damaged, the whole city gets damaged, it gets dirty. Somehow we have lost the sense of how to I'm not saying control, how to creatively think of these things so that all other issues take priority over the religiosity rights. Is it my right to go to Simhasta or that Kumbh Mela at Haridwar when there is a pandemic? People from Bangalore tended to go to, and each family had to struggle. One case in Bangalore, the daughter-in-law was telling the mother, please don't go, please don't go. No, she flew. She went, came back. She had corona and then the whole family was infected. No, we should not respect in such cases the old people, old tradition and all these such stupid, these are andhashraddha, these are superstitions. And see how much damage they have done. But it has to be taken up on a larger platform, larger society, then only it will get reflected in politics. In democracy, the people have to think and they have to put pressure on, or they have to send people who are sensible in their heads and they are selected.
So,
I hope I answered the question.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. So I would now like to invite Shraddha to conclude the session and then for of thanks. For Shraddha.
Thank you, Parag. Once again, thank you so much, ma'am, to be here and to enlighten us. As I said earlier, the studio intent was to make them aware. We have still not disclosed the entire design problem to them, but it was divided into 3 segments. One was parking, the second was public space, and third was role of architecture in public space. The second segment was predominantly was to make them aware. Creation of public space is not only government's responsibility. it is, as an architect, we also could be sensitive enough to understand the need and then design for it. And and your presentation definitely did a justice to make them think about it, and I'm sure it would help them to in their design processes. You know, how do we, what are public spaces first of all, and then how do they impact us? How do those spaces impact individuals? And it was really insightful presentation that we had today. Thank you so much once again. I would also like to thank Anjuman Islam to give us this platform where we could invite you, and this was very important session for all the students of architecture. Thank you once again, ma'am, for being here.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you for inviting me. It was enjoyable, and all the best to all the students and all the staff members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.